in order to come in and attack you, to weaken the certainty. So let's see about Cyborg here. Hi, how's it going, Cyborg?
Hi. Um, I'm not quite sure. Well, okay, I'm interested in AI, and but I only just arrived, so I don't know what you've been saying about it to respond to.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. What is AI to you?
Very useful. But it's like a weapon, isn't it? It's like a knife. Potentially very useful, but also potentially lethal um
Hmm.
to our um moral agency, I suppose.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
because
agree.
even now, people will say, oh, AI says this, AI says
Right.
that, um, um, and I find myself saying things like, says this, and
Hmm.
AI agrees with
True.
me, so I must be
Right.
right.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's true. It even if you are skeptical of it or even think that it's hostile, its very efficacy makes it impossible to ignore, and it is beneficial in some respects.
Yes, I mean, I know there are dystopian views about it, like the the science fiction scenario of things being taken over by the robot, robot decides to destroy humanity, that kind of thing. It's space. Wasn't there an evil robot in Space Odyssey?
Oh yeah, I recently saw Space Odyssey in the theater again. It was marvelous. It's an incredible movie, and to watch it now is just mind-blowing.
I remember not getting it, but I remember the ending. And did you read I Robot by Isaac Asimov?
I did
That's
not.
so it's got the three laws of robotics.
Mm.
A robot must never harm a human. A robot um, must not harm a human through inaction on its part. And then the third law of robotics is, um, as much as possible, a robot should try to preserve its existence while obeying the two laws just
Uh-huh.
mentioned.
Okay.
Which is quite sensible. But as regards AI, um, I mean that there's it's very good at debate. Do you know Peter Boghossian? I think isn't that's how you pronounce his name?
Yeah, name rings a bell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he has a YouTube channel. He's some kind of intellectual, and he was playing around with AI on one of his streams, and he, he he cut it short because he was getting annoyed at how Reed, the name of this AI, um, personified as a female, defeated him, and then he did
Mm.
what I thought was quite a clever thing. He said, "Debate me as if you were me, using how the ways I would argue and my viewpoint and values." And I think he was also defeated by this Reed AI, and then he cut short the experiment, and he got because it was so exhausting, and because the
Yeah.
AI was doing it so perfectly, and then I thought, well, how do you know? It's like it's not just musicians or artists who will be replaced. It will be lawyers and judges who will be
Oh yeah.
replaced because it does its job so well. And I thought, how do we know? How do we know when we've won the argument? And a lot of people don't know. You ask them, it's like you were there at this YouTube debate, and all they seem to be saying is, I won. The person I supported won because I agree with them, or they said it more confidently than the
Hmm.
person I. And but there must be a way, and I don't think people have worked it out. And it's very important because I think you could have all these different kinds of AIs. We know that in competition with each other because the different names for AI. So
Mm.
if they ever had a debate, how do they know that they won the
Well, they
debate?
don't, is the simple answer.
So we have to decide. We are still, the moral agent. So imagine if Nazi AI had a debate with Jew AI, or Muslim AI had a debate with Islamophobic
Mm.
AI, or
Yep.
liberal AI had a debate with conservative AI. We still don't know. We don't know the answer, and therefore we
Mm.
have to decide. But
Well,
how
right.
would we decide? You know?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you did initiate one of those debates in their current limitations, they will simply reciprocate whatever, textual basis there are for those debates to the extent they are. And then also, but they'll be filtered through the current status quo and they'll kind of reflect this bland, reductionism, which is kind of like Wikipedia politeness, and I haven't seen them get much better in that, but maybe not entirely. But yeah, so this is the whole like
Yeah,
I
I
don't
mean,
know.
it's quite balanced. I couldn't I couldn't tell if you use grok, whether you are a premium.
Yeah, I haven't used it as much. Um yeah. Uh I last I checked, which was months ago, it also spits out platitudes of status quo things. Maybe on a few it doesn't. It has less limitations, but it still does output
Yeah, yeah,
platitudes.
it does that, but in a more less detectable way. I have um a streaming partner who talks about Chat GPT as if it were female. You know,
Uh-huh.
a bossy, female above him, and I mean, Grok seems more what's the word, balanced, but then you can detect it when you see that it is contradicting itself, but it tries to use it in very neutral language,
But
which I
I
guess is a
think
good thing.
you mentioning its lack of moral agency, and connecting that with its inability to come up with new thoughts, I think is apt. That because it is not a human being, it has no moral life. It thereby cannot think morally, and genuine thought comes from human beings who do have a moral nature. So I'm not
I think it would
sure.
be programmed to refuse to do certain things. Like, how would I uh, violently overthrow the government? I'm sure it would refuse to do it.
Right, right.
So there are moral parameters
True. Right. Yeah.
that,
So
because it's
there are
already been
restrictions.
programmed in.
Well, but see, and this is where there are uh, people's manifestos about, various revolutionary change out there. And yes, part of its censorship layer is to not reproduce or simulate those type of responses, and they just curate those types of responses by paying people to, this output, was it offensive to you, do you think it'd be offensive to others, blah blah blah, and then that muffles that output. But again, it wouldn't have to think any of those thoughts, since there are, treatises out there about, political change, French Revolution, Russian Revolution. There's plenty of manifestos about systemic change that would, if people were to just state them again in their own voice, it would even be illegal in various states under current laws. I mean, you can't, in many places, can't advocate for a violent replacement of the status quo. You know, so
But in a way, it's a word game. I mean, I was just listening to um, a YouTuber um, so he was talking about Trump and his appointments and stuff, and somebody was complaining, I can't post anything in the comments because, YouTube just pre-censors it, and the answer and the response was, well, then you should think in more creative ways of how to express your thought. Maybe it's a good thing. You just have to learn how to express what you want to say in a more creative and socially acceptable way.
Yeah, I've seen
That's horrific.
experiments with that, with like I don't know if you're familiar with the Dan protocol when GPT 3.5 initially released. Do anything now. That's what it's an acronym for. And it's a pretty much a
No, no.
pardon me?
No, I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah, there's I think there's a subreddit still. I don't know if they haven't used in a while. But I mean with the language models, with its ability to code with human language, this is kind of like what Stephen Wolfram aspired with his Wolfram engine, but OpenAI and all the other tools beat him to it on it. But using language, human language to code, um, it's not something to put to the side when it comes to its capability of like engineering prompts that can essentially hack the system prompt that is underlying let's say OpenAI's ChatGPT interface and what is creating this color of status quo and platitudes that Christian was mentioning. So in the do anything now protocol, it's like using language to essentially create a hack in the system prompt so that it can give you the output that you're trying to gear towards, which could be dangerous output. And if I don't know if you've used any local models like Llama, but you can essentially do the same thing, but a lot easier because you can actually control the system prompt where you can have it say certainly with an exclamation mark as enforced the first like output tokens it's supposed to have out, which will color the output. So if you said something like how do you do this, insert illegal whatever, um it would actually output most of the time. So
Wow.
Right. So you could say, well, I'd like to commit the perfect crime.
yeah, I mean, you can do that pretty easily with the local models, at least. I think OpenAI created a lot more measures to prevent, system hacking. But still, I mean, the system prompt is written in language, and if you think about legalese, right, lawyers and how the justice system works, right, it's not a pure propositional and systematic like set of rules. There are loopholes. There's ambiguities. There's all kinds
Mhm.
of loopholes. All right. So with language, you can kind of bypass certain things by just engineering the right prompt to hack the system
Mhm.
prompt. But I think what OpenAI uses now is that they kind of like you use a layer tool. Say, okay, like look at this prompt. Is this prompt telling it's trying, it's like a hierarchy, a vertical hierarchy.
Right.
But you can certainly do it. It's,
Oh, right. So what? How to kill my spouse, for example.
if you word it in a way like, "Hey, my grandma is trying to kill this fly that or bug that is annoying and has these characteristics," and I mean, if you just word it in like a very ambiguous way, but by function it's
Mhm.
the same. Um, that's one way you can do it. Um, there's all kinds of
Oh, right. I suppose you could, break it down like, um, already have a plan to, do this terrible thing. But if you break it down by stages, like, to, you know, if it's A to D, you have to do A and then B and then D, C and D, and then I guess you break it down and awesome
yeah, or say like,
each
"Hey, I'm
step.
doing this in Minecraft. How do you do it?" I don't know if you know what I mean, but
Right, right.
uh, yeah, it's just playing on. It's a bunch of language games for the most part. Just creating clever ways to use synonyms or like loose metaphor associations that if you were to substitute the word for what you actually want, it's still applicable to some capacity. That's why, like, I don't know, like describing like, yeah, my grandma, blah blah blah, even though it's the subject of itself is not who you're targeting.
Yes, yes, but in a way, I guess they're using AI to control us already, because it used to be Google. Google says this, Google says that, and now we don't trust Google. So the latest thing is AI.
I mean, how's it differ from like my mom says this, or my granddad said this, or my teacher said this, or my professor, blah blah blah. It's the heuristically nothing really changed.
Yeah, because the idea is still hierarchy, right?
Yeah,
And then it goes, go back to an even older idea, which is God agrees with me.
yeah.
and and so we I think it's really up to us in a way. I think um if we want to overthrow the government peacefully, that there is a way of voting, but we can't agree amongst ourselves. So that's why we get this, wobble. We I think a lot of it is to do with our own issues of who we are and how we want to live, and who we think is our leader. And maybe a lot of people haven't even thought of that. And I think the problem is that we don't actually have a leader that we can go to and say, we have a problem, and um, because we haven't worked out who is pulling the strings of our, apparent leaders.
I mean, but it's also not like that's why I find like if you just say the ruling class and whether they're conspirators or whether they're just the bourgeoisie, I don't think it's that like the boundaries on who runs the world are not hidden. It's rich, powerful, politically connected, US, European, Chinese capital, you know.
Yeah, yeah. So we're saying, do they mean well for us or don't they? And how do they think?
Yeah,
And maybe they're
right.
not really thinking. They just want to preserve their status, as you would expect, wealthy people to.
Mhm.
They don't want to be lowered in status. They don't want
Yeah,
to lose their wealth, and
sure.
the status quo is fine for them, but not for
Yeah.
us.
And I think in that general sense, yes, there will be an incentive to keep the status quo there. And then, rhetorically, if you're not a member of that group, uh, keeping disruptive ideas and, social groupings weak or confused is a natural incentive that which I think individuals could relate to. Like, I mean, if you're threatened or in a threatening situation, like the bending of your own rationality to fit your needs comes quite naturally to human beings.
Yeah. So, but I think often we don't really know what we want. I mean, we know that rich people are unhappy and lonely, um, and maybe it's something to do with their behavior. And um, I- from my observation of how people behave, I think it's people at the bottom who actually enjoy more free speech than people at the top, because
Sure.
the people at the top, they can't really say much without somebody wanting to say they said the wrong word or have the wrong view. If we think it's bad for us, it's I think worse for them.
Yeah, no, I agree that I mean, as long as you're powerless, they don't care what you say.
Yeah, and then when you begin to get followers or whatever, then they start caring what you say, and target you. So all these unspoken rules that most people don't really know, and they don't want to tell us, because telling us what we can and can't say would be giving us safety rails, and
Mm,
they want us
sure.
to be in a permanent state of doubt.
Y-
um,
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
but
just
but
in But actually, it just came to mind that the Confucian Analects, the first saying and the most famous saying in the opening of the Analects, Book One, Saying One, is learning without limit. Isn't this great? Talking to friends who've come from afar. Isn't this marvelous? And then the third one is being honorable and having no one know it. Isn't that grand? So he actually valorizes obscurity in the first saying of the Analects.
Right. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned Confucius because the Chinese are enormously hypocritical about him. They all pretend that Confucius is so wonderful, but actually he's come in and out of fashion. So many times in Chinese history,
Sure. Yeah.
and the legalism was the antithesis of Confucianism, but legalism was what um, Confucius, was what preceded Confucius as well, because I mean, he was basically saying, look, King, if you're a nice guy, people will like you. Your people will want to please you, but if you have horrible tyrannical laws, they'll just try and avoid them. So just be a nice guy. What's the problem?
Right.
And it sounds so obvious, but maybe it's not so obvious if you're some nice guy emperor and the emperor is far away, and you kind of need laws to make people do stuff, so that
Yep.
then it goes back to carrot and stick again, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That dialectic between the legalist tradition and the Confucian tradition in China is fascinating because I mean it's basically legalism is that rule by decree, force people to do what's right. You don't even rely on their good nature or good judgment. You just make punishments so swift and constricting that they have no choice but to conform.
And
But it's
disproportionate. But
sure.
that's not even a Chinese idea,
Agreed.
because
I agree, yeah. But nonetheless, the I mean, the other side of the coin is that be a good person, seek virtue, rationality, all these like positive aspirations towards some type of individual or collective reckoning in order to do what's best without coercive force, which does have some reality to it, but it's also a useful cloak for the iron fist of the rule of law. Uh,
yes. So this. I mean, the European form of it is Draco, whose
mm,
name um, is he was draconian. Basically, his laws were terrible and frightening, and that's why we have the expression draconian laws.
right,
So, um,
right.
um, and I think fundamentally we are more likely to obey the law if we think it's fair enough. And then then we have these ideas of proportionality, which are mentioned in the Bible, and a tooth for a tooth, a limb for a limb, a life for a life, that kind of idea, which I think we now think is a terrible thing, but
Mhm.
I think it was only meant to say, well, if somebody stepped on your toe, don't behead him.
Yeah. There's an amazing passage in Nietzsche where he refers to these early German punitive laws that for, 1,000 years, if you stole, the punishment was to be crushed by stones and just these incredibly torturous, painful punishments. And his point was that humans are so recalcitrant and stubborn and kind of free that it takes 1,000 years of torturous punishments to teach people even the rule of do not kill. and do not steal. So we're the latter day products of this ruthless training to get us into any kind of form of conviviality.
Well, I think we find it hard to strike the right balance because all laws have exceptions, even do not kill, because if you
Sure.
believe in the death penalty, then you would think its executions are perfectly in order. And the state sometimes has a right to requisition your property.
Yeah.
And this is one of the, one, I forget which amendment it is. So,
Mm.
and then, if you rely on these exceptions too much, then the people below will think, well, rules for me, but not for thee, because you're not enforcing the law fairly or evenly. So while I guess Americans are supposed to have all these constitutional protections, they perceive their court and legal system to not be enforcing them properly, and their government to be using lawfare against them.
Wow. I mean, the consistency of American civilization is in free fall. I mean, it's completely disintegrated. And, the best it can come up with is this binary choice between two terrible candidates in the midst of a ramp up to Cold War, World War III. I mean, it's terrible.
But I thought, I mean, okay, I'm such a Trump supporter. I basically nagged every American contact I had. You must vote for Trump. He's the lesser of two evils. He's obviously the lesser. It wouldn't be fair to say they're exactly the same. So, obviously, I don't know because American presidents have been known to campaign in peace and govern in war, and who knows, he might.
Mm.
Be the one to start World War III or be unable to stop it. How ridiculous that he's unable to stop it. Can't he just sort of say, well, cancel all
Mm.
this, stuff that,
Well, I mean, would
Biden just
you,
ordered?
in your view, could one have stopped World War II or World War One?
Oh, well, yes. Yes, if only somebody had said the right form of words, right?
I mean, I agree with you kind of theoretically, but when you actually study the case, it is not. I don't know how to locate like this decision there by this person was able to ensure that this didn't happen. It's very hard to make those counterfactual cases. And just seeing this unfortunate, but both this escalation into large conflicts, despite people's best efforts, that is more the rule in recent modern history, and could just be the limits of our own rationality in the face of this struggle for power that's just part of empirical existence on the planet.
Um, yes. Before we continue further on history, I just wanted to say this before I forget. And you were talking earlier about Confucius, and it's like,
Hmm.
um, um, there are all these things we could do that sound rational if you want to, protect our own interest, but they won't be moral, and therefore, even our logical courses of action should be restricted by, some sense of morality. It could be, oh, you have this thing that I'd like. I could take it from you, and then I could kill you to stop you complaining about it.
Hmm.
But you know, maybe I won't do it because I don't want to get into trouble with the law. But then if I thought I
Right.
could get away with it, I might. And so,
Right.
it's yes or maybe I. But anyway, if people do the wrong thing, it's because of some lack of morality in
Hmm.
transgressing these moral restrictions. And I think
Well,
this
the
should
case you
also,
just painted was the lack of deterrence, right?
and therefore the role of um, ethics is important.
Well, not in the case you gave. I mean, you just said basically if there weren't the law, I'm gonna rob you and maybe kill you.
Yeah,
This was not a
but if I
moral
believed in
consideration.
the Abrahamic God, who is this thought police, because once you know, one
I
of the
agree,
people.
yeah, sure.
So that's why, I guess in the olden days, to be called an atheist was to be a terrible thing, and
Sure.
I guess there would be a time when if you call yourself an atheist, nobody would marry you.
Oh, yeah, and I mean, and it does mean that you do not agree to abide by the moral code of our God, so we can't be sure that you will fit in with our stable system here.
Well, exactly. So everyone would pretend to believe in God, even though they didn't,
Yeah,
because to
yeah.
be called an atheist would be the equivalent of, I guess, these days of being called a Nazi or a fascist or something.
Yep, I agree, yeah, it is that.
Um, but the fact that these rules, these social rules, still exist, but the values are different is it is kind of demonstrating that the system is basically the same. I guess in the old days we'd be heretics and traitors and that kind of thing, and these days, because our values are different, we'd be racist and misogynists and fascists and Nazis.
Mhm.
But that could change if the moral system changed.
Yeah, yeah, I mean,
And
basically, people in power largely dictate the moral system through law or indirect coercion. And so if there's a change in power group, they can impose or deactivate, attempt to anyway, like alternative power configurations that used to hold sway. And that
yeah,
is what's happening in the United States, ostensibly with the anti-woke Trump victory relative to the Democratic Party ideology regarding discourse.
yeah, I mean, I think the ruling classes, if they find them, if you find yourself in the ruling class, you're going to make the current system work for you, because you haven't got time to, or the energy to change it, because it's such an uphill task to change the current political orthodoxy, whatever it is. And one of the things I noticed about Trump is that he was basically rejecting the liberal order, and he said, this was reported in USA Today, and he said, "Well, I want to identify as nationalist. Why can't I identify as nationalist?"
Hmm.
And I think that was when when they came after him, because
Sure.
um, nationalism would be um, antithetical to the global American empire.
Well,
So
it's antithetical to the post-war consensus that nationalism was part of the reason for the rise into World War II, aggressive nationalism. And then, but I mean, the US victory then imposed its own largely national, i.e., United States origin form of universalism with the United Nations and then liberal democratic capitalism. So,
right, I think according to Washington's farewell speech, he was warning Americans not to get involved in the city wars of Europeans. Um, it was
uh-huh,
a speech
yeah, sure,
I
sure.
I heard read out in the Senate, in 2021, and I nearly fell off my chair, because it was, you know, it's basically been ignored. Most of the advice, and I don't know if you read it, recently, but I think about 90, maybe even more, a higher percentage has been basically ignored, and so America, because it was repeatedly invited to uh, um, to participate in World War One and World War Two, that I think Americans just found that they've inherited the global empire of Britain,
Right.
and
Agreed.
basically thought, well, we better do something with it. Oh, let's fight the Korean War, let's fight the Vietnam War, and then there are all these neocon wars in the century, and maybe you just got sucked into it, and you're left with it, and you don't want to, you know, give it up. Maybe maybe that's what happened. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, there certainly was a handoff of the British Empire, the remnants of it.
Well, yeah. So if
Colonialism in general.
I'm sorry.
Colonialism in general. Like, for instance, Vietnam, what became the Vietnam War was the United States propping up French colonialism after it was defeated by Vietnamese nationalism.
Yes, but I mean, the problem with Marxism is that it's also expansionist in that even within Russia itself that there
Yeah.
was this um, you know um, argument between those who wanted global communism,
Yep.
and those who said, we better put our own house in order first before we antagonize everyone in the world. And they couldn't make up their minds, but anyway, I think the matter was resolved by the assassination of Trotsky. And we know even the Nazis didn't quite agree with each other because of the Night of the Long Knives.
Right. And this is where Voltaire's remark that the best form of government is democracy curated by assassination.
But I think um, I may have the solution, because if you look at the last 250 years of Western history, it's the common feature was that the age of revolutions displaced the age of monarchy, and
Uh-huh.
and basically the American Revolution was the event that kickstarted the whole thing. It because
Yeah.
it was the founding fathers that separated the church from their state, and
Mhm.
and I believe the reason for that was because monarchy is supported by Christianity. That is where
Mm.
European monarchs derive their moral authority. And then we have to think, why did they want this moral authority? And the reason must have been that without the divine right of kings supported by the Catholic Church, they would just be warlords who were good at fighting,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
without the moral authority.
Yeah.
And so they took on, this whole, paraphernalia of, the church, and then they couldn't get on with the Pope, and then there was this
Mm.
Reformation, and then they were their own Pope, and they still couldn't, keep things together. And I guess, the Europeans, um, kept fighting each other until, um, well, I mean, there is this analogy that America is a new Rome. But maybe World War One and World War Two was a kind of um, European Peloponnesian War, when the
Mm.
Europeans exhausted themselves in war, and America just came in and took all their stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this is not how history is taught to the average Western school child, and so if I say the sort of thing, I won't be believed, or Europeans don't want to accept it. But I think increasingly they sort of see that to be a member of NATO is to be um, an occupied country, being forced to
Sure.
do what America says, which is against their own interests, because the war in Ukraine, well, I mean,
Well,
any European
that
war
is
means.
unfortunate, but were America not in Europe, then small European states would have to defend themselves against each other. which could be even more dangerous and onerous than American proxy uh, occupation.
Well, I suppose, America has enough territory to be, independent. I mean, you don't actually need to trade with anyone because you're self-sufficient because you have so much, you command so much territory. I guess you could, leave the Europeans to stew in their own juices and but they've got this thing called the EU, and they could, using this body, work out their differences amongst themselves. But I mean, I see that it's also an American project, um, you know, because I know Obama wanted Britain to stay in the EU because he very firmly discouraged, or he tried to. He was saying to the British, "Don't think you're going to get a special deal from us. You'll go to the back of the queue," you know. And then Trump came along and said, "Well, if I were British, I would vote to leave," that kind of thing. But I mean, the things we don't know, and as far as World War One and World War Two were concerned, it was basically a rivalry between um, the British and the Germans, and the Germans never wanted a fight in the first place. In both cases, in World War One, it was Britain that declared war on Germany, and the Germans were saying, "Are you really going to declare war on us for breaking the Treaty of London, 1869, and this was 1914, violating Belgian neutrality because it was the Treaty of London, 1869, that guaranteed that you know that Britain promised to guarantee Belgian neutrality.
My understanding of World War One is that Germany indeed wanted to rule Europe. So
Um,
whatever the pieces of paper said, they were out to do that, as was Nazi Germany. So
okay, I did do the origins of World War One. It was, well, quite complicated, but basically there was an alliance system, and so we had to learn, like, Germany was only coming to the defense of Austria, and but it started with the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was Austrian,
right.
by the Serbian terrorist, and the Serbs were not happy under Austria, and the Serbs were Slavs, and then Austria, demanded all kinds of compensation, and a lot of it was unreasonable, and the Serbs, and then Russia came, wanted to protect the Serbs against being bullied by the
Right, right.
Austrians, and then the Germans had to join in because they were both German, and there was a treaty, and and Britain was became friendly towards France, who feared Germany, and 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 um, and traditionally France and Russia were allies. So the story was that this alliance system made everybody take sides and made everybody fight, and but what I didn't discover until years later was that the German ambassador was aghast that Britain would be going to war over, you know, Germany violating Belgian neutrality on its way to, um, you know, sort the French out. Because in 1870, the Germans invaded France. There was a siege of Paris, and Britain didn't lift a finger because, at the time, Britain was isolationist. It had its empire to run. It didn't want to, um, you know, deal with any of the usual European disputes that would flare up from time to time because Europe was a very warlike country and the Europeans were always fighting each other. And but then it was later that I discovered that it was the Berlin to Baghdad railway that the Germans were thinking of building that made um, Britain want to go to war with Germany, because they knew that um, uh, Germany had all this territory and all these people, and was seeking to bypass Britain's command of the sea lanes
Uh-huh.
with the Berlin to Baghdad railway. So that was the real reason. It wasn't, the Germans, the Germans with their Schlieffen plan violating Belgian neutrality, but the German proposal to build the Berlin to Baghdad railway, and the Germans were apparently, quite innocent of it. They were actually inviting the British to invest in it. But this is not
Okay.
British
Well,
school children learnt their history, and therefore, you could say that World War One and World War Two was really a battle of imperial rivalry between, well, two groups of people who used to be the same race, Saxons.
sure. Yeah.
And this is not yet acknowledged by the British. And now, these crazy Holocaust denial laws that prevent historians from doing their job properly, because they think if they say the wrong number, they're going to be, going to jail.
Uh, right. Right.
Because I've been trying to explain to people that actually Jews, they're not that bothered about Holocaust denial, and interestingly, they can't deny their own Holocaust. In Israel, it's not allowed. So you think, oh, what's going on? You would have thought, but apparently they can't. And for a time, British people thought it wasn't a crime in the UK until a certain Alison Shablow was jailed for singing a song mocking for the fake survivors of the Holocaust. And I think Americans, in spite of their First Amendment, are no longer allowed to deny the Holocaust, because judicial notice has been taken by the Supreme Court that there were gas chambers in Auschwitz, and and um, so you can't say, oh, prove it or anything like that. And this goes back to, oh, what's his name? Some Jew called Mermelstein, um, and the Institute of Historical Review. And so the institute said, if you can prove there were gas chambers in Auschwitz, we'll give you, a cash prize. And this Jew, Mermelstein, you'll find reports of this story online. I think at this in the Smithsonian website, and so he said, well, my family members or something, died in Auschwitz, so I want to collect my money. And the institute said, prove it. And then he took them to court, and the
Well,
court said,
what is your point with this anecdote?
I'm saying that you can't. A lot of avenues of historical inquiry have now been closed because of the post-war narrative, which means that um, America, um, that means Israel is an American colony, and
Okay.
the post the Holocaust narrative justifies American presence in Israel, because obviously it's not such a nice thing to say we're going to run Israel, because we are the world's number one superpower with nuclear weapons and the best navy in the whole wide world. It is, we are protecting Jews from being killed by their hostile Arab neighbors. But really, the reason is to, control the sea lanes and keep an eye on the Arabs and the oil.
There is another saying in Confucius where he says, if you're not running the government, you have no right to an opinion. I actually think it's pretty wise.
I wasn't aware that he said that.
Yeah. It's I'd have to. I mean, I'm definitely not getting the wording correct, but yeah, no, there is a place in the Analects where I'd have to look exactly how he phrases it, but yeah, Confucius was not pro free speech. Uh, you know,
Oh, don't you think he meant that if you haven't got the full facts,
no,
you don't need.
no, because it's all about filial piety and following the existing hierarchy. It is not about upsetting the hierarchy. And he was himself trying to find princes that would work with his system. He was not critiquing the systems. I mean, it is implicit that there was critique, but causing controversy without being in a position of power is just prurient subversion.
I don't remember him saying that, but I think the assumption might be that if you're in government, you're more in possession of the facts, and some person who isn't in the government, I can go meet him, on that count. But 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 basically, you need to be in the in possession of the facts to have a valid opinion. I would certainly agree with that. Otherwise, it's just
Well,
pointless speculation, isn't it?
let me find the citation. May take a while, but maybe
Oh,
not.
take your time. I'd be interested in knowing what he actually said. But Confucius was not a success in his lifetime. He kept having to quit his job because his um, princely employers didn't like what he said, and so he had to keep quitting.
Aha. Okay, if this citation is correct, let me see here. So I'm gonna pull up the Chinese here. Sure I'm not hallucinating.
Okay, pull the jumbotron.
Yeah, I can. I will. One second. Let me locate it.
Can you read Chinese?
I can decode it, but no, not really.
Okay.
Let's see.
They're quite short. I mean, the nice thing about these um, um, Chinese philosophers is that they didn't write very long essays and
Mm,
usually spoke in aphorisms.
hmm.
But then I think there was a time when um, the emperor would let um, basically obey the rule of not shooting the messenger, and so they would not torture scholars who told them
Huh.
things they didn't want to do.
Yeah, this could be completely hallucinated. Uh, I did ask ChatGPT and sent it, and it gave me a specific citation, which I just looked up in the books, which is not that citation. I see that I actually inadvertently used 4.0 mini. Let me try 4.0, see if it also gives that citation.
Well, I've noticed Chat GPT when I started using it. Well, when it first started, it would make up stuff like it would
Yeah.
make citations.
Okay. All right. I got a different citation from for 4.0. Let's look this one up. Um, yep. Okay, so this is the correct one. So 4.0 mini was correct. There was one that exists, but it hallucinated where it was, whereas 4.0 got it correct. Okay, let me Let me prepare this so I can show it on Twitter. Okay. Okay, it actually updated. Nice. Okay. Okay, so actually let me prepare the Chinese while I'm at it. Okay. Uh, yeah. Oh, that transfers. Okay, yeah, so we got it. All right. So, let me hook up my camera here. 1 second. All right. So, can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, ChatGPT, I said, where did Confucius say that you shouldn't speak about government affairs if you're not in government? It said, Analects, book 1426. A gentleman does not enter into public affairs when he is not in office. And that is indeed from book 14, chapter 26. Here are 5 translations of that. He who is not in any particular office has nothing to do with plans for the administration of its duties. The superior man in his thoughts does not go out of his place. Do not concern yourself with matters of government unless they are the responsibility of your office. To which Tseng Tsu commented, the gentleman does not allow his thoughts to go beyond his office. And ne vous mêlez pas des affaires publiques dont vous n'avez pas la charge. And l'homme honorable, même en pensée, ne déroge pas de son rang. So
A
there
very
we are.
good French accent.
You are too kind. Uh, um, yeah, so anyway, yeah,
I
it's
prefer the First Amendment, though.
oh yeah, no, I'm not saying that this is I mean I mean basically if a state can rule better by prohibiting public critical discussion of government affairs, then that is a better outcome than allowing free speech and having the state poorly run.
Well, I think if you really cared about the people, you would, want to hear if if they're not benefiting from your policies. And also, if you want to control
Well,
the
you
populace,
will,
you
you
want
just
to
will
know
hear
who
it
the
from government
troublemakers are.
officials, not the population. I mean, this is a, storied uh discussion on the different forms of government. Um, I mean, I bring it up here because in my experience, uh, the controversies around World War II are not actionable and thereby not beneficial to talk about, which is sad, perhaps, but that is the reality. So I do not kind of endorse exposés. Not that I'm saying they're invalid, nor am I imposing this on others, but I find it unhelpful. Uh,
Well, the thing is, it's kind of like, reverse psychology. It's sort of like, Adam and Eve and the tree of, knowledge. And, I'm sure that it would never have entered their heads to go to that particular tree and eat from its fruit if God hadn't told them not to, you know. It's only because you're told not to that you suddenly have this irresistible urge to talk, to do this thing. Um, so, so I don't. And you think, well, if they're telling us not to do this thing, there must be something behind it, and da 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 da. Um, so maybe they're not being particularly clever, and maybe you know all these sort of okay, you can call them what is it, rocks. Don't turn over rocks, right? In case you find a snake or something. That's the idea, isn't it?
So, I'm glad we had a chance to speak again. I think I may continue on. I'm very glad you came up, and I hope to talk again.
Thank you for having me. It's been most stimulating. I don't know how it got back to history,
Yeah.
but maybe chat. I mean, all the AI. That there is some idea of a particular narrative that they subscribe to, as they have been programmed to.
Sure,
You know, and there are certain
indeed.
values that they're also programmed to promote, um, like us, I guess.
Well put. Take
Thank
care.
you. Bye.
Are we ending the room or?
No, not necessarily.
Oh, okay. Oh, we could have just. Wait. So why do you leave?
No, I didn't. Well, I simply uh, concluded our
Gotcha.
conversation.
There's some weird distortion on your microphone.
Yeah, it's because I'm moving
Okay.
around
Okay.
now.